The Democratic Party knows that no matter what they do, whether they do it by, hook or crook, if the left will cry and whine and be mad, but they will still line up and go vote for the Democratic Party because they don't want the Republicans in power. And that trick works every single time, and it co-ops left-wing energy back into the Democratic Party and the establishment.
Just be happy with who you are.
To me, it was like, you got to look at it from the perspective that they have done everything they can now. Like, this was the Hail Mary, the Voltron, the Captain Planet. They fused together Buttigieg and Klobuchar into this like magnificent beast, and they pushed Joe Biden out there in large part, I think, against his will. He doesn't really look like he's enjoying himself anymore. And even with all that, combined with the $100 million estimated of favorable press that was given to Joe Biden leading up to the event, the endless amount of large donor donations in the form of super PACs to Joe Biden, all this combined versus the grassroots Bernie Sanders, independent donos, people on the ground floor, canvassing, phone calling, volunteering their time. It's like everything against you, the entire establishment versus the people, and we're still tied. Like, that to me, that alone is a bit harrowing. Like, that to me is a happy story.
It's a happy story, and that's a huge underdog story. And at the same time, I think it's also very educational for people, because people are sort of getting exposed to just how against our interests as working people the establishment in both parties, including the Democrats, really are. They're starting to see the sort of hijinks and the behind the scenes stuff. Lots of rumors about Obama himself trying to make this centrist coalition happen right before Super Tuesday. Again, sort of rumors. We're not completely sure if that's true or not. But yeah, in spite of everything and all of the anti-Bernie media that's been, pumped in his direction over the last several months, we're still in this thing. We're still tied. The working class still has a chance. A lot of these people are scared because if the Democratic Party really gets led by a working class candidate, all of their jobs in the party hierarchy go away. All of the pundits that get their cushy little consulting jobs and their little talking head jobs, that goes away. And so a lot of this is sort of a struggle for these people to maintain their position in the hierarchy and not let the rabble in. Like, our job as working people is simply to go to the ballot, vote for them, and then stand back and let them take it from there. And for the first time in our lives, that's not happening. We're not okay with that anymore. And they're filling their diapers.
How do you feel about the idea then that, like, I've got a feeling, and again, this is coming out the perspective from a Canadian, right? That it really feels like this has woken up a lot of people to the idea of class consciousness. Like, for the first time, they're starting to realize, like, I interviewed, say, Benjamin Dixon and a couple other politicians, like Joshua for Congress, who were both speaking along the lines of, like, I used to be, I was always a little bit to the left, but I never really considered myself like, a democratic socialist or anything of that nature. But it's really easy now to give that messaging that, like, it's not really like, outsiders, Mexicans, browns, people who are taking your jobs. Ideas like healthcare should be a human right, that tuition shouldn't bankrupt you. All this now seems to be part of the American consciousness.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think, and part of it like goes back to the Occupy movement and before that, because even before the Occupy movement in the U.S., class was not even discussed. I mean, we had 30 years of Reaganomics and then third way Democrats, and class was really purged from the conversation. So Occupy sort of had to happen to set the stage for a character like Bernie Sanders to rise and take that class struggle sort of to the next level, at least on the electoral front. And yeah, Bernie Sanders, for the first time in our lives, is talking directly about working class interests. He's appealing directly to our needs, our material needs. He's expanding people's political imagination. Detabooizing the word socialism is definitely one part of it, but just in general saying, how much money do we pay in taxes and what do you get back for it? Endless wars, tax cuts for the rich. We're one of the only countries that gives tax dollars over to the government and expects nothing in return. And Bernie is challenging that entire paradigm. And the big thing he's doing, especially through a lot of his really interesting campaign videos, is he's shifting this whole narrative that if you're poor, if you're struggling, if you can't afford your medicine, it's not your fault. that, in a society that's so hyper individualistic and wants to make you feel like an atomized individual that needs to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, for the first time, Bernie's saying your suffering is not your fault. It's the fault of this bigger system. And it's the fault indirectly or directly of the politicians that are doing the bidding for this bigger system. So on all of those fronts, it's really radical for American politics, right? Like in Europe, Bernie would just be a center-left normal person. But in the U.S.,
absolutely.
given the Cold War and the Reagan years, he is quote-unquote radical. Well, we need that in order for our society to move beyond a lot of the Cold War ideology we've been conditioned with.
But now, like, are we at this point where do you feel a little bit deflated after what's happening versus him versus Joe Biden? Are you feeling that? Like, to me, I've never wanted this to be about a singular person. Like, I don't want, like, and I'm guilty of the whole cult of personality thing. If you're watching this live on our stream, you'll notice that there's like a little Bernie Sanders floating right above me, right? Like, I think a lot of it is, it's captivating, and other parts of it are adorable. But like, does this move beyond Bernie Sanders? Can people actually take what has been accomplished so far and say, hey, we've woken up to this. We do want Medicare for all. And even if someone like Bernie Sanders doesn't get in, how can we achieve these kind of things tangibly?
And no, I totally agree. And I think it's really encapsulated. And I think Bernie is playing that game when he makes his slogan, not me, us. And one of the most amazing things was in a recent rally where I was watching, and everybody started, he made some great point about politics or whatever. Everybody started chanting, Bernie, Bernie. And he stopped him. He's like, stop. It's not about me. It's about you guys. And so I think Bernie already realizes that he is a vehicle for this energy. And whether that vehicle ends at a primary loss to Joe Biden or continues beyond, goes to Trump and beyond, he is a raft that's carrying our interests into the mainstream political ocean at this moment. And, whatever comes of this specific moment in this specific campaign, the energy isn't going anywhere. And that's one thing I think that the centrists and, the corporate establishment, they're sort of overlooking. They're not, they think that if they defeat Bernie, they'll defeat us. But Bernie has energized people. He's expanded their political imaginations, and we're not going anywhere. If anything, if they screw him out of the primaries or whatever happens, it's just going to radicalize people more. People are going to be looking for an alternative more. I mean, some of those polls coming out of like California and Texas saying that 57% of people prefer socialism over capitalism. Now, whether they exactly know what socialism means or not, the fact is they are identifying capitalism as the problem and saying that we want an alternative. And that is incredibly radical. And then the last thing I'd say about Joe Biden and whether or not I'm feeling too down about it is, a lot of people aren't political junkies like us. They're not watching every single move. They probably don't even know who like an Amy Klobuchar really is. They might have heard her name once or twice. People really tune in maybe a week or two before they go to the ballot box and sort of casually check in. And now that this stream has narrowed to two candidates, people are now going to be reintroduced to Joe Biden. And Joe Biden in 2019, and I don't want to be mean or ableist or anything like that, but Joe Biden in 2019 is not Joe Biden from 2016 or 15. He can't remain coherent for more than 30 seconds. And when Bernie starts hitting him hard on his record of cutting Social Security, supporting these forever wars, being basically a proxy for the corporate credit card companies in Delaware, etc.
Anita Hill, history of segregationism,
go on forever. Exactly. I think a lot of people are now introduced to Joe Biden. They think he's the safe route, but now it's really Joe Biden's going to have to stand on his own 2 feet. And if the Bernie supporters can be happy about anything, it's like just get Joe Biden up in front of a camera and let him just talk. And that will be a big argument in our favor, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, does he have enough time before, say, next Tuesday? Like, next Tuesday is a do or die crucial Super Tuesday. Like not as super, obviously, but like still. At the same time, like, is there going to be an opportunity before then for Bernie Sanders? Like, I know he's got a rally tonight. I'm guessing he's going to have a handful between now and then, but to really like nail a lot of those points home about Joe Biden?
Definitely going to be a challenge. I don't know when the next debate is. I think that would help a little bit. But yeah, it might happen. Like, it might happen too quick. And yeah, it might lead to a situation where just because of the name recognition, the momentum, the centrist consolidation, the media on Joe Biden's side, I mean, it might be a situation where we lose this thing, but, I don't want to give up hope yet. I think like we have to keep fighting. We have to get as many people out to vote. We have to reach out to our older relatives and sort of give our perspective, especially for those relatives that aren't on Twitter, that aren't on social media, that don't really keep up with stuff as much as we do. I think if we get too defeatist and we get too sort of, sad and in our feelings about it, it will actually just be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So until that next Tuesday hits, we got to keep our heads up and we got to keep fighting. Bernie did really good in a state like California. Bernie does really well in the West generally.
Mhm.
We'll see what happens with the Elizabeth Warren endorsement, right? She might
Mhm.
be able to push a few of her voters in Bernie's direction and shift things a little bit more.
Mhm.
So it's really too early to say, but yeah, I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic, I guess.
Yeah, no. And like, here's the way I would take this entire scenario. I would again say that this is still a pretty incredible accomplishment. That Bernie Sanders again was capable of tying against all the big money, all the big donors, all the the deeply entrenched Democratic establishment, and he's still in the race. It's still neck and neck at the end of the day, right? It's parity.
Exactly.
So why not take what you see what you could learn from Super Tuesday? Right? Like, take a step back and see what didn't work. What things do we have to improve on? And I'd say one of the biggest ones, obviously, is reaching out to maybe the African American community, for an example, as well as reaching out to the youth. Like, I'm really against people who do voter shaming. Like, I don't understand how anyone considers that productive. Instead, there should be voter outreach. So now we have two very specific demographics that I think we should start talking to.
No, I agree, and I think Bernie recently released an ad with him and Obama, with clips of Obama saying very positive things about Bernie, and I think that's an attempt to sort of shore up maybe people in the Democratic coalition that are a little worried about his quote unquote radicalism, and simultaneously appeal to older Black voters, especially, who may still be wary of a political revolution or not fully on board or in touch with Bernie's message. So, and I also think online you see Bernie's campaign proxies shift to a more reasonable and kind and embracing open-armed approach. And I think that came from the top down. Whether or not we think this attack on, like, oh, Bernie's fans are so mean, whether we think that's fair or not, and in a lot of ways it's not really, I think his campaign realizes that you need to start opening your arms now that it's down to a two-person race. Try to open your arms to everybody that you haven't been able to do yet, and then hit Joe Biden on his record. Like, old folks, one of the best constituencies for Biden and one of the hardest for Bernie. Well, they love Medicare and they love Social Security. Joe Biden has a decades and decades long career of attacking, undermining, and trying to cut those things. That could be really effective if Bernie and his proxies know how to play that and put that in front of older voters. And, like, it is so close right now. Bernie has all the grassroots energy on his side. So we don't need to win over every single Biden voter. But I think you're right. There are some key demographics that Bernie's campaign at least needs to cut into if there's going to be a hope of expanding Bernie's base at this point. And again, that Elizabeth Warren endorsement might help among the more like college educated white liberal types. And then Bernie's campaign shifting to this more welcoming strategy might also help in some other demographics. It remains to be seen. So I guess one thing I would say too, sort of going beyond that question, is, and I'll actually just ask you a question.
Mm-hmm, please. Yeah, I mean, we have to remember that we're doing two shows right now.
Absolutely. So I'll throw some questions in your direction.
Yeah, please.
I like to think about the scenarios. So, we can talk about different scenarios, but what happens if Bernie loses to Biden, right? Whether through whatever, insider shuffling or just genuinely just heads up loses the race. What do you think is the next step for the movement? How should people who support Bernie right now respond and orient themselves to a Biden campaign? Do we do a voter boycott? Do we do a third party run? Do we, stay home, or do we throw our support behind Biden? What are your thoughts on that? Because there's a lot of debate right now on the broad left about what our next move should be if Bernie does lose to Biden.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, we should start first with Elizabeth Warren, right? You brought her up a little bit because she just dropped out as of the time that we're recording. I personally do not foresee Elizabeth Warren endorsing Bernie Sanders, unfortunately. And most people would be like, that doesn't make sense ideologically. They seem a lot more in tune than someone like Joe Biden, who spends most of his time smelling young girls' hair. Or talking about his own golden leg hairs. He, obsessed with hair, clearly. But that notwithstanding, that should be something that I think she's going to basically pick what is ever most politically advantageous to her. And in this situation, I don't think Bernie Sanders looks like a clear favorite. So why would she throw her weight behind him when that could be political suicide down the road? Maybe not suicide, that's probably a little harsh, but let's just say it might be a negative aspect to her if she wants to then parlay herself into a position in Joe Biden's campaign, right?
Right.
So one of the two situations, I think she's probably just going to remain neutral for now, see where things go. I just saw a poll that says that apparently 2% more, but it's almost 50-50, but 2% more of Elizabeth Warren supporters gravitate towards Bernie Sanders than they do towards Joe Biden. Which again doesn't really help much. That puts us back in parity. The other question is, does Bernie Sanders continue this if they're going to stay neck and neck going into a brokered convention? Because obviously, I think the superdelegates would then throw their weight behind Joe Biden just to be able to push him over that 1,991. That could also lead to, once again, a historic, riot or something of that nature.
Yeah.
Harkening back to, I think, what was it, 1981 was the last one?
1968, the Democratic Convention with the riots in the street, you mean?
Yeah, the one with the riots on the street, yeah.
Yeah.
So that could lead us into that scenario as well. But then, okay, so to answer the more prescient question, what do we do about the future? How do we find ourselves? First off, in terms of Bernie Sanders and his campaign, that's a lot more in the hands of Bernie Sanders. Like, what is he going to do post this run in the event that he isn't going to be the presidential nomination? Is he going to align himself with Joe Biden? Is he going to get like a position in Joe Biden's cabinet? Is he going to be like, I don't know what Joe Biden would feel comfortable giving him? Maybe like the housing department? I'm not totally sure. I don't think he'd give him anything significant. He wouldn't give him like, Secretary of State or something to that effect. But in terms of your support behind Bernie Sanders, you'd have to wait and see what Bernie Sanders is going to decide to do in that respect, right? But in terms of just everyday people, especially all the people who've now been woken up to the idea of class consciousness, something I don't know if you guys have talked about it, perhaps like a workers' party or talking about forming one. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And in fact, I think that would be, regardless of what we do with this exact election. And actually, just to cover that base really quick, it's my personal opinion that if it is Biden, what we're given now is a choice between, a sort of incoherent boomer capitalist, dipshit, and another incoherent boomer capitalist dipshit. And the Democratic Party knows that no matter what they do, whether they do it by, hook or crook, if the left will cry and whine and be mad, but they will still line up and go vote for the Democratic Party because they don't want the Republicans in power. And that trick works every single time, and it co-ops left-wing energy back into the Democratic Party and the establishment. And I think if we keep playing that game, then eventually we're just going to be playing ourselves. We don't have enough time with climate change and all the other problems in this world to wait another 4, 8, 12 years to hope another candidate comes up to put all of our eggs into an electoral basket again. And so at that point, I totally agree. I think there should be some sort of boycott election, low turnout, let the Democrats know, maybe an independent run, vote for third party, whatever. But long term, and this is where I get to your workers' party point, that's absolutely essential. We have to build a base of power outside of the two-party farce. We cannot allow our energies to constantly be pumped in to this obvious sort of circus, and that's going to require some sort of independent political organization. Now, I don't think that that organization should be just another third party like the Workers' Green Party or something, because for decades and decades, the two parties have worked together to pass a bunch of laws and just structural obstacles that will never allow a third electoral party to be viable in the way that a Democrat and Republican is viable. And so that's going to require movements that are really rooted not in electoralism, but in social movements. It's going to require us to engage with the labor movement, mass work like tenants organizing, feeding and serving the people, independent media, right? Like what you and I do, expanding that. And I think we're going to have a political organization that is nationwide, that is disciplined, that is focused. It can't just be a bunch of sort of loosely connected orgs across the country, because we've been doing that for decades and that can only get us so far. It has to be sort of good leadership, discipline and focus, and it really has to be rooted in the workers' interest. And the last thing I would say is there has to be an electoral aspect to that, right? Like even Karl Marx says, you run the workers' candidate. Even if you know that workers going to lose, because you get out on that stage and you tell workers what their real interests are, you expand political imagination, etc. Basically what Bernie's doing. But
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, but the org that we're going to have to build is going to have that aspect, but it can't just be that. It has to be an overall above ground sort of front and a below ground, more militant structure. I think of like Sinn Féin and the IRA or like the Black Panther Party and the BLA. Not saying that we need to engage in like terrorism or armed struggle or anything, but it needs to have independent power base outside of the electoral system and not completely depend on it, while we can run campaigns in it, fight Democrats and Republicans, bring workers over to our side, but ultimately be rooted in the community and build a power base outside of the electoral system. Like, what did the Black Panthers do? They fed their people. They protected their people from police brutality. They set up health clinics, for free so people could go have universal health care in their communities. They made sure the elderly were taken care of, their breakfast school program. That's where I think everybody on the left should start pushing our energies and our minds if this goes in another Biden direction, corporate establishment direction.
But okay, so my first question would be: in the event that you form these other independent parties and these other independent political parties, the United States system is pretty much a two-party system. Like, I don't see them ever making any kind of inroads outside of pulling votes away from the Democrat and allowing the Republican to win. Right? That kind of age-old argument. Like, what would be the benefit to someone outside of the scope of, say, like Bernie Sanders, who does have like a shot at becoming the president of the United States? So, I
mean, at that point, we might just have to recoil from electoralism altogether, right? Voting is different than electoralism. Electoralism is a political strategy whereby you pursue primarily through the electoral mechanisms to find your interests and advance your goals. But voting is something that you do just sort of as harm reduction or as like the least of two shitty options. So you could have an independent workers movement with actual presence in communities, taking care of working people and poor people and oppressed people's material needs, while also saying, yeah, I guess I'll vote for that Democrat over that Republican because obviously, he's better than that other person.
Yeah,
and that could be fine. But I'm just saying that we just can't. Yeah, because I agree with you. We can't just become a third party like the Green Party, run candidates and split the Democratic vote and just have Republican rule forever.
Yeah, like,
Republicans.
We have a socialist party in Canada, and it's completely politically ineffective. Like, it doesn't accomplish anything. Whereas if I get a whole bunch of people running to be a part of the NDP, which is kind of like the lefter party in Canada, and they fill up the NDP with a whole bunch of MPs who are either very left-leaning or crypto-socialists or democratic socialists, for example, then the party itself starts to change structurally. So could you do the same thing with like the DSA in America?
Right. No, I think that's a possible alternative. My only fear with that is you have to think how long it would take for a third sort of force in American politics to sort of take over the Democratic Party, overthrow the establishment, win seats in the House, district attorneys, governorships, etc. And I'm looking at the IPCC report that says, 10 years until we're past the threshold. I'm looking at a future a little more pessimistically that doesn't give us enough time to really build up those forces and pursue those goals. If we didn't have climate change breathing down our neck, I think it might be a slightly different game. But I just don't think we have the time that's going to be required to really focus on that. And if we can't pump all of our energy in that direction, then I think rooting our base in the actual working class communities and oppressed communities is probably the better, more effective route to take, given that set of sort of confinements, if that makes sense.
Hey, you. Yes, you. Do you like cozy environments with other wholesome people? Well, then come join the Discord. It's got a whole bunch of stuff to help you with creative endeavors, such as stock footage, royalty-free music, and an amazing community of people looking to help each other out and uplift your content. Join the Discord now by going to weareserfs.com. That's weareserfs.com.
We would like to thank Miranda Marone. You are our monarch, and we thank you for our indentured servitude. We would like to thank our lords, Ricky Pilgrim, I'm Raft, Michaela Schmid, Tomospin, Ferrer Tahone. You are all the pillars of our organization. To our Knights of the Square Table, Paul Parafit, Daniel Kahn, Clement Chutskoff, Alan R., Josh Mickelson, and Dr. Zayas, Dr. Zayas, Cooper Pilot, Andrea Lynn Epperly, Dylan Bythe, Terry, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. And to our merchants, thank you for taking mercy upon us.